Welcome back. Last time we ended on a puzzle. Theory says green assets should have lower expected returns, yet in the real world, green stocks have often beaten brown ones. How can both be true? The answer comes from the same authors, Pastor, Stambar, and Taylor, in a 2022 study aptly titled Dissecting Green Returns. They document that United States green stocks did indeed outperform brown stocks over roughly 2012 to 2020. But then they ask the crucial question, where did that outperformance come from? And their answer is that it came from unexpectedly rising climate concerns over that period, a wave of new regulation, shifting public attention, and investor demand that pushed green prices up as it arrived. It did not come from high expected returns. In fact, their estimates say expected returns for green are lower, just as the theory predicts. This distinction is subtle, but absolutely vital, so let me put it plainly. Green stocks won the last decade because the world became greener faster than expected, a one-time repricing. That is a very different thing from green stocks being destined to win every decade. And so the lesson is a warning. Do not naively extrapolate green outperformance into the future. If climate concerns are already priced in, the easy gains are behind us, not ahead. This is one of the most practically important insights in the whole course, so let me hammer it home with an analogy. Imagine a stock that rises sharply because the company announces wonderful news. Would you conclude that this stock will keep rising forever? Of course not. The good news is now in the price. Green outperformance over the last decade is much the same. It reflected a stream of good news for green assets: tightening policy, rising public concern, surging demand, arriving faster than the market expected. Once that repricing has happened, it doesn't automatically repeat. In fact, this creates a genuine risk for naive, sustainable investors. If you pile into green funds today because they always go up, and climate concern then plateaus, or worse, a political backlash reverses it, as we've seen in the United States, green assets could underperform for years. The theory doesn't say green is a bad investment. It says be honest about where the returns come from and don't mistake a one-time repricing for a permanent edge. Now, if you're an investor, you want a practical framework for thinking about this trade-off. And Pedersen, Fitzgibbons, and Pomorsky provide one in 2021, with what they call the ESG-efficient frontier. Their insight is that ESG can play two roles at once. It can be a return predictive signal, information that helps you forecast performance, and it can be an forecast performance, and it can be an investor preference, something you value for its own sake. They combine these into a single picture. For each level of ESG you might demand, there is a best possible Sharpe ratio, the highest risk-adjusted return attainable at that sustainability level. Think of it as a menu. The frontier lets you read off the cost of your sustainability preferences. And their reassuring finding is that ESG-aware investors, those who simply use ESG as useful information, lose very little Sharpe ratio. They can be sustainable almost for free. Meanwhile, ESG-motivated investors, those who insist on a high sustainability level for its own sake, knowingly trade away some return in exchange. It's an elegant, honest framework. It doesn't claim sustainability is costless, but it quantifies the cost and shows that for most investors, that cost is modest. I like this paper because it refuses to take sides in the marketing war. The sustainability industry wants to tell you green investing is free, or even profitable. The skeptics want to tell you it's a costly indulgence. Pedersen and his co-authors say it depends on how much sustainability you insist on, and here's the exact trade-off curve. If you just want to avoid the worst-governed, scandal-prone companies using ESG as information, you sacrifice essentially nothing. If you demand a portfolio of only the very greenest firms, screening out most of the market, you pay a visible price in diversification and expected return. Most real investors sit somewhere in between, where the cost is small. It turns a shouting match into a measurable question, which is exactly what good finance should do. Here's where the evidence gets genuinely contested: the carbon premium debate. Bolton and Kacperczyk in influential studies and Katzberzik in influential studies from 2021 and 2023 find that high-emission firms actually earn higher stock returns than low-emission firms, what they call a carbon premium. The interpretation is that investors demand extra compensation for bearing transition risk. Hold a dirty company, and you want to be paid for the danger that climate policy will hammer it. So far, so intuitive. But the picture is muddier than that. Several studies of the corporate bond market find no clear carbon risk premium at all, so the equity and bond evidence don't fully agree. One influential explanation for the confusion is that investors underreact to carbon risk. They don't fully price it in, which would be a genuine market inefficiency rather than rational compensation. Whatever the right interpretation, there's an uncomfortable implication we have to sit with. If brown firms really do earn higher returns, then brown pays, at least in the short run, even as that very capital funds exactly the high carbon activities we're trying to wind down. The market, in other words, may be rewarding the wrong thing. That tension is one of the deepest open problems in sustainable finance. And notice how it interacts with the equilibrium theory from last video, because at first glance they seem to clash. Pastor, Stambaugh and Taylor said, green should earn less. Bolton and Katzberzik find brown earns more. Are these contradictory? Not necessarily. They can be two views of the same coin. If investors dislike brown and shun it, brown prices are depressed and brown expected returns are high. A risk premium or compensation for holding what others avoid. That's consistent with green earning less and brown earning more at the same time. The genuinely unresolved part is whether this brown premium is rational compensation for real transition risk or an inefficiency because investors are asleep to carbon risk. Those two interpretations point to opposite policy conclusions. One says the market is working, the other says it's failing. And the honest answer today is that we don't yet know which dominates. Let's step back from returns and ask a different question. Do investors actually value sustainability, quite apart from whether it makes money? There's an interesting natural experiment here from Hartzmark and Sussman in 2019. In 2016, the data provider Morningstar introduced sustainability globe ratings for mutual funds, a simple, visible 1 to 5 globe symbol. Because this was new information suddenly made salient, the researchers could watch how investors reacted. And react they did. Funds rated highly sustainable, 5 globes, drew strong inflows, while funds rated low sustainability saw money flow out. Crucially, the globes did not predict future returns. High globe funds didn't subsequently outperform. So investors weren't chasing performance, they were expressing a genuine preference for sustainability itself. This is clean, real-world evidence for the non-pecuniary motive we discussed at the very start. People value sustainability as a positive good and will move real money to get it, even without a return advantage. It confirms that the values motive isn't just something people claim on surveys. It shows up in where they actually put their savings. There's one more force working against sustainable investing, and it's about time, literally. Sustainability tends to pay off over the long run, but our financial markets are wired for the short term. Look at the machinery: quarterly earnings reports, annual bonuses, monthly performance benchmarks, daily marking to market. Every one of these pulls attention toward the near future. Mark Carney, then Governor of the Bank of England, captured this brilliantly in 2015 with a phrase you should remember: the tragedy of the horizon. The costs of acting on climate fall in the present, on whoever acts, while the benefits accrue far in the future, beyond the horizon of most investors, most CEOs, and even most political cycles. So no single decision maker has the incentive to fix it, even though everyone would be better off if all acted. What are the remedies? They all involve lengthening horizons, long-term investment mandates, pay that vests over long horizons rather than 1 year, and cultivating patient capital that can wait for sustainability to pay off. Fighting short-termism is in many ways a precondition for sustainable investing to work at all. And this connects back to the delegation chain from our very first video. Why is a fund manager short-termist? Often not because they're foolish, but because their own clients and bosses judge them every quarter and their bonus lands every year. A manager who sacrifices this year's returns for a payoff in 2035 may simply be fired in 2026, long before being proved right. So short-termism isn't only a psychological failing, it's baked into the incentives all along the chain. That's why the remedies are structural rather than motivational. You don't fix the tragedy of the horizon by asking people to be more patient. You fix it by changing mandates, contracts, and pay so that patience is rewarded rather than punished. It's a sobering reminder that many of sustainable finance's hardest problems are problems of incentives, not of intentions. That closes our examination of whether sustainable investing pays. The answer, to summarize in a sentence, is it probably doesn't cost much. The theory says green should earn a bit less in expectation, and short-termism gets in the way. Now we turn to part D and get concrete about instruments. Specifically, the fast-growing world of sustainable fixed income, where a great deal of real sustainable finance actually happens. Green bonds, social bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds. Let's recap. Green stocks beat brown over the last decade, but because climate concerns rose unexpectedly, a repricing you shouldn't extrapolate. The ESG-efficient frontier shows the cost of sustainability preferences is real but usually modest. The carbon premium debate is unresolved. Brown may pay in the short run, which is deeply awkward. Investors clearly value sustainability for its own sake, as the Morningstar globes showed. And short-termism, the tragedy of the horizon, works against the whole enterprise. In the next video, we get practical, turning to sustainable bonds, green, social, and the clever sustainability-linked structures. See you there.